Discussion under the title, Can Machines Create Art? But before we start with the official discussion, we ask Roland Benedikter to make a short introduction speech. But it's a great pleasure to introduce Roland Benedikter. He's a co-head of the Center for Advanced Studies, co-organizer of the conference here together with TransArt. Roland is a research professor of multidisciplinary political analysis in residence at the Willy Brandt Center of the University of Wrocław and in Poland. As I mentioned before, together with we two chair the Center for Advanced Studies at Eurac Research here in Bolzano. Roland, you are an expert, we know it. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, dear Harold. Thank you all for coming to this extraordinary event. My task is to very, very briefly introduce a framework for discussing the current interface between machines and art. And to start with, to go just right into the matter, what I observe always again is the lack of a philosophical framework for framing the debate. And very briefly, I would say that we have today a transforming triangle between three main elements. The first is the episteme-techne nexus, which means that art is a kind of expression of knowledge, but a craft-oriented expression that is dedicated to interconnect knowledge and the human in the human being into concrete objects. And if this was the classical triangle, and we spoke, for example, in the German federal government Future Council about human-machine interaction so far, then we would say today that this is undergoing a shift, and we would speak from the start today of human-machine convergence. That means a more direct melter between the human factor, the art-craft factor, so the fact of building objects, and the knowledge-techne nexus. And if you see what is starting today in this philosophical setting, then we would say that craft and art are increasingly created by the two poles of technology. It has the timely expression of the episteme-techne nexus, and the human being is just behind it as a helper or an assistant, since, as Holger already mentioned, art created by technology is still made or co-made by humans because it is based on machine learning, and machine learning means that artificial intelligence is based on settings, on patterns that are programmed still widely by humans. Now, the 5 dimensions or the 5 drivers I would identify for the current debate between machines and arts, which is currently undergoing these shifts I described, are the following. First, machines are trying to create traditional arts. Machines are painting paintings, machines are composing music, machines are creating even sculptures. So traditional art starts to be influenced by machinal art. We, of course, would have to ask if this is art at all, or what is happening here. Is it a fake or facsimile of art, or is it really an expression of self-critical, as Holger mentioned, consciousness that is using objects to express itself in a different form of thinking? Second, machines reach out to recognize aesthetics as the basic of art. That is a layer deeper. Machines like the most advanced Google artificial intelligence recognizes and can predict if humans find a painting or another artwork appealing or beautiful, or not. The success quote of artificial intelligence predicting if art is recognized as art or not is about 80% according to Google statistics. That means that art is not, technology is not only faking art or imitating the art production in a traditional sector, but is entering the inner realm and one of the innermost realms of human beings, of humanity as such, which is the factor of aesthetical logics or aesthetical thinking, which was thought traditionally to be the realm of the human in humans as such. Third, machines start to auto-reproduce themselves in non-predictable ways, i.e. artificial intelligence starts to write artificial intelligence. Since 2019, Google has inscribed and formalized a patent to have artificial intelligence basically write itself without a clear goal, a clear specific arrival definition of where it should go, which is a new dimension of where the sector moves. Fourth, machines start to melt with the human body and brain. We have heard it by the transhumanists, integrated extensions and prostheses, and last but not least, machines start to interconnect perceptive and cognitive process between beings. You all have heard about the January 2019 Nature publication on brain-brain interfaces, where for the first time, based on experiments, previous experiments of Harvard University, Washington University's Chinese researchers have directly interconnected a human brain with a rat brain, allowing the human brain to mind control the rat and to steer it through a labyrinth that was given by the researchers. So we have basically not only the transformation of the art sector through the introduction of new intelligent machines, but we also have a general change of the very pattern of the field where art, technology and humanity interfaces or intersects, which is defined by the advent of a merger convergence between humans and technology, which is of course then exercised and experimented in the art sector. Just very briefly to conclude, a few examples for these ongoings in these 5 crucial archetypal typological dimensions. First, already mentioned, the first painting sold in 2018, October 2018, for 432,000 euro, made by artificial intelligence, composing music and moving images, always more influenced by artificial intelligence. As you know, a good amount of the blockbusters coming from Hollywood is, in the meantime, faked by artificial intelligence, even with dead actors, and so on. The creation of art works by encoding similarity, repetition, and difference. So by relatively traditional mechanical and mathematical procedures, which are combined in an always more sophisticated way, to put it very simply. Third, machines recognize aesthetics. Google NEMA AI can predict whether humans consider an image beautiful or not. And third, artificial software from Google learns to write artificial software from Google since 2017. Please follow this up in the internet, because this is having a huge success rate in the meantime with regard to precision and with regard to inventiveness, so that Google expects that in the coming years, not only the art sector, which serves as a mere laboratory for the bigger civilizational transformation, will take over basically the mainstream of technological innovation. All this is done through an artificial intelligence system that recognizes brain imaging, imitates it, and puts it then into reconstructible patterns. If we tried to elucidate the fourth dimension. Machines melt with the human body and brain. You know that brain-computer interfaces, brain-machine interfaces are now mainstream. They are going mainstream in the coming years. So you have a tiny electrode implanted in your brain, as Elon Musk, for example, plans it with his newly launched enterprise Neuralink in 2019, implanting tiny electrodes in every human being's brain from early on, so to steer machines by your brain activities, directly transferred to machines and computers, perhaps even to artificial intelligence in the future, and even to the cloud, to an abstract storage device that basically records all your brain activities in the future and thus creates a human memory that comprises every human activity, every human consciousness activity on Earth in real time and preserves for all the time in the future, creating a real memory of humanity in real time. How this works has different aspects, but the future will certainly be in brain wearables, which means that we can be creative, steer machines, create art by simply wearing brain activity reading machines that are no longer intrusive, so there's no processes needed, but you just put it onto your head. And many depart from the assumption that this will be the new basic tool for creating art, but also for being beautiful because it's stylish and it looks like an ancient Greek, as the advertising goes. People like, for example, Elon Musk, the star investors, are putting a lot of money into this sector. We are estimating that at the moment around 10%, a little bit less or more, is already entering the sector of melting technology with the human body, which is quite a lot in an early phase of development. And this is now the last and fifth dimension I would identify in the field of the merger between art, technology and humanity, which is that machines are now used to interconnect the perceptive and cognitive processes of different beings, including different species, to directly interconnect consciousness processes. And what else could be called art if not the interconnection and melter of consciousness processes, even between different species? You know, they do it. The University of Washington, the University of Nanjing did it with a rat because it was too dangerous and morally questionable if they did it with two brains by humans. But of course, the goal is sooner or later to directly interconnect human brains through so-called brain-brain interfaces that you see here applied to the rat. The human that you see here was able to steer the rat through a labyrinth by his simple thoughts. So to stop it here, because we are running already out of time, I guess, I just wanted to summarize that the transformation of art, and if we speak of a transformation by the means of technology, is not limited to the transformation of the traditional art sector, which is, in my view, the soft version. The hard version, the hardcore version, will be the transformation of human creativity as such by interconnecting consciousness processes through machines, through new devices. And this will change the game at its basis. And therefore, I wish we would discuss not only what is happening in the art sector per se, but discuss the art sector as a laboratory for transforming the greater civilizational field through technology in always more penetrative, profound, fundamental, and perhaps also radical ways. That is starting now. And we have to see that art is perhaps changing in its core, but that is not the point. Art serves as a kind of catalyst for much more deeper and much more encompassing transformation processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. You did what you promised. In German, we would say Roland delivered a Steilvorlage. Peter Kirn, I guess you have a good basis, some provocative hypothesis for the next coming discussion. Can machines create art? I introduce again Peter Kirn, creative digital music. He will moderate the discussion here now. I invite to come here next to Peter Kirn, Holger Volland. You know him. He started this morning. Yesterday started Riccardo Manzotti. Wonderful speech from Terra X Cube. Riccardo, please come here, Holger. Then we have with us Natalia Fuchs from Russia. I guess she will come in a digital way. It's so beautiful. You don't know exactly whether people are in a digital or physical way here. Then we introduce Moises, Horta, Valenzuela. We introduce Dmitry, Morozov, Robin Meier, and last but not least, Peter Kirn. So partially, colleagues should be in a digital way here. Wonderful. Okay, so Peter.
Well, good morning, everybody. We have a full, for all of our participants, we have, even though we're running on a delay, we're going to use our full time, which we have the advantage of this lovely counter here. So we have to kind of fit inside this time frame, but it occurs to me that with all of the people involved, we have a number of different perspectives in terms of practice and background and training and understanding. Also, having watched everybody through the course of the week, and some people on this panel I know quite well, some people are new, but everybody I've been listening to, I would say it's unlikely, or certainly my goal for the next 44 minutes, 28 seconds, is not to establish a consensus, even though we're all aligned on the stage, kind of visually looking like people might agree. I think there's really some diverging perspectives, so I really look forward to everybody talking, because I think we may have a nice, vigorous debate. So behind me, just to introduce the people virtually, and to kind of give a sense of who's here from different perspectives. Robin Meier, who's coming from France, is a composer and also worked in various ways with machines. We're certainly not restricted to talking about artificial intelligence, as the machine learning in this sense that we've been watching today is not the only frame to understand human-machine interactions. There's a lot of other interesting embodiments in people's work. Also, Dima, aka vtol, here on the bottom. Hi. Is also working as an artist, not only in music and sound art, but in kinetic sculpture and other media and working with relationships with machines, as well as dubbing. His artist name means that he's named after an airplane, so that says something about human-machine interaction. Natalia Fuchs is the curator and has also guided a lot of what has happened this week, so a lot of the work that you've seen and talks that we've had and the micro-residents that we had have come out of her work and out of moderating and facilitating laboratories in different cities in the world over the past year and a half. And I think Natalia is also kind of coming from a media archaeology perspective, so really deeply rooted in these historical questions. And then here on stage with me, we have one artist whose work you've seen last night. We, the artists, have a number of perspectives that we've been discussing through the week. And then I think also, I mean, to me, it's important that we have Riccardo here as somebody who's defining what the mind can mean, and also connecting us to areas like psychology and understanding of the mind. And then also Holger, has presented some perspectives that also I think are part of a conversation with policymakers about what all this stuff means. So, with that in mind, now knowing who all these people are, there are kind of two main questions where it seems that there are two kind of diverging camps, or where I'm kind of curious to see where everybody is falling on the sort of spectrum of ideas. One question is about this issue of how we define the human and how we define consciousness around our own minds. and in particular this human-machine interface. And I noticed that for the artists, a lot of that conversation has talked about, has been concerned with what's already happening with a hybrid human-machine relationship with things like social media. I noticed that with some of the other speakers, this is going another direction. So there's this first question of, who we are as humans and where we are now, where we're going in this machine relationship. And then the other main question that kept kind of coming up yesterday and today is this issue of what the machines are doing creatively. And literally, yesterday I was able to walk between this room and hear one perspective about machine and creativity, and walk across the hall to artists and hear people saying the opposite, right? So there's clearly something to talk about in this panel. Maybe to start with this, and this is a lot to cover in 40 minutes, 37 seconds. But I'm curious about kind of hearing those two camps right, if there really is this much divergence, and where people are following, and where people are falling in this kind of debate. But now, because now we're on the same stage, so now I just have to figure out how to, not to set up a confrontation, but I'm really intrigued to kind of hear some of those statements go challenged, right? Because I think the artists are in one sort of perspective, and maybe artists are agreeing enough that they're not challenging each other, that perspective. And then some of the speakers on this side have this other perspective about AI creativity that hasn't yet been challenged by the artists. So it's a shame that we're kind of like, some of you are floating heads. I'm looking up at them like they can see me, but of course they can't. So this is the other weird spatial thing. Like, it makes sense to me that I kind of look up here and look people in the eyes, but of course the technology is not working that way because their eyes are virtually on whichever one of these cameras is active, and I don't know, probably that one in the back. So if I look up this way and then kind of look at them in the back, that's actually how we're making contact. So we're already in, just as humans, one of the things that happened over the last few weeks is that our embodiment has shifted pretty radically and forced us into kind of different social interactions. So maybe the best place to start actually is with Riccardo.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Well, I will try to address both questions from the same angle. I think the crux of the matter here is the notion of the agent, the notion of the mind. And we're always stuck with a naive ontology about the mind. And it's all too easy when we have a machine producing artifacts to attribute to that machine creativity only because it's capable to produce a certain number of artifacts. For example, there are plenty of natural processes that produces new patterns and combination. Super simple case, evolution. Evolution has definitely a creative power, but we don't attribute to evolution the same degree of creativity that we attribute to an artist. So something is missing there. I mean, if we just have, for example, a random pattern generator, sooner or later it will produce everything. But that's not creativity. There must be something else. There must be the full-fledged features that characterize a mind, a consciousness. But then the question is when we will have, so to cut a long story short, I would say that to have an AI artist, we would need to have a conscious AI artist. So we will need the artificial consciousness to put into the mix, because otherwise it will just, from my perspective as a philosopher, it will just be a tool to produce, maybe to help artists, but that would just be the production of structures, patterns, that human beings may consider to be aesthetically appealing. They may have aesthetical value, but they would not have been created by someone who had an understanding of their, it's like a language generator. Today GPT-3 is the algorithm that is able to produce text that it is undistinguishable from the text produced by a human being. But does it get the meaning of it? I don't think so.
Well, just to flip the question back to the human definition, if you had to I mean, you have an entire book on the subject, so we should all read your book. But if you had to kind of sum up, how would you define the human mind as creativity? We're in the Beethoven year in Germany, and you know, part of the myth of Beethoven has become this kind of disembodied genius, right? Hopefully, as musicologists, we give a more fleshed out version of who Beethoven was. But this kind of myth that had evolved is this sort of genius who floats in, you know, in space and kind of comes up with music, just sort of flows out of him, whether or not that's the musicological definition. But there's a converging scientific understanding that the mind is more than just disembodied intellect, that it somehow engages with the world around us, right?
Absolutely, and I'm the first to have a completely physicalist approach to the mind. So I would never go for an immaterial mind in the romantic, idealistic sense. But that doesn't mean that we are just a brain, because after all, the brain may be the ultimate mistake, because it supports some kind of animism. Some kind of the ghost in the machine. We no longer have the soul, but we have the brain, and we give to the brain all the burden that once we gave to the soul. And I've been surprised by the way in which, for example, the human brain, rat brain communication experiment have been presented. They have been presented in terms of communication between human mind. But why do we need to use the word mind in this sense? So we need to provide a neutral ontology for consciousness in the physical world, and that's the real challenge. And going for the brain is a shortcut that so far got no confirmation from empirical evidence. We got only correlations, but we got no identity claims, and that's the real hard nut to crack.
Right. Right. Yeah, I had this question about the mice too, but let's just since as I understand it, it's motor control we're talking about here, right? Not, you know. So I mean, I can drive a car, but that doesn't mean I am a car, or maybe it does. I mean, that's another question. So I mean, to turn to Holger before I go back up into the virtual world. So the people looking at things like the Rembrandt experiment or the Beethoven experiment are looking at some of the same science about this embodied physical mind from psychology and neurosciences as the rest of us. But they're reaching, it sounds like a different conclusion, that there's more optimism that you presented, that you can complete a Beethoven symphony, and that could evolve into some kind of creative intelligence. So what makes those people more optimistic? Is there kind of different data that they're looking at? Is it different understanding, or do they just see this going in a different direction?
Well, I think one reason why some people are more optimistic than others about the role of humans as artists in a future that has a lot of machines in every parts of our lives is that so far humans are just better in destroying things. Humans are better in wanting things. Humans are better in bringing their own history into their work and what they do. And this makes it sort of unpredictable what humans do and how humans act. And as I see the roles of creatives, creatives are always also destroyers. Their role is always also part of taking what's been around for a while and then shaping it in their way, in their own way. And this is something that technology so far can do. Right, so it can copy so far, and of course you can program some random interactions in it and say, choose a color of your own and then whatever, do it. But this is not willpower, and this is not history and personality coming into it, into the work. So if you look at all the Beethovens and Rembrandts and whatevers, they might be beautifully stitched pieces of creation. Yeah, you could hang them on the wall like you hang an IKEA poster on the wall, but it's not art, because it's in the same way not art as an IKEA poster is not art. Sorry, IKEA.
I don't think we'll put IKEA out of business in this panel, so it should be okay. I'm curious, well, Robin, you've worked in composition with kind of bringing machines in different ways. Is there a way that you do find that that this technology becomes a kind of collaborator, or is there something kind of human or about the externalization in these machines, or is it more that you're drawn to the unhumanness of them?
Yeah, I've made art with machines, and not just machines, also with insects and other living beings. So for me, creating art is always a collaborative process in a certain way. I really don't subscribe to the idea of the Beethoven genius pouring out music. I think when we create something, we're always in an interaction with an environment. So what I've noticed so far in the discussions and the few things I've heard in the previous presentations was there's large emphasis on this distinction between nature and culture. So there's us, like the human mind, imprinting or expressing something through a technology, controlling a rat through our brain. And I really don't subscribe to this idea. I think, at least in my experience, when I create something, when I work with a machine, or even when I work with a mosquito or a pigeon, there's an interaction. And as much as I have an influence on the things I'm working in, the medium I'm working with, the sound, the algorithm, that thing gives something back to me, and I will react to it. It changes me as much as I change it. So there's really this feedback loop going on in the creation, which is really important for me in this kind of work. So I definitely go for the option of a collaborative work, and as much as a tool can be an extension of what I'm doing, it's more than that. I mean, there's an interesting story I read about dogs, right? So the dog is always seen as the human taking the wild wolf and transforming it into this pet and useful animal for hunting, and expressing our humanness through this biological artifact, as it can be called. And there's this other narrative of dogs actually evolving, co-evolving with humans, and to become likable by humans, so they get adopted by us. And the article is quite funny because it ends with the description of the dog actually having succeeded as having a great lifestyle now, just hanging around at home, being fed, taken out whenever it wants. And as much as the dog lover will get something out of this relationship, so does the dog. So maybe this is another way of looking at our interaction with machines also, in a larger sense.
Dima, your studio is recreated for us here after a fashion, and that we get a video tour, and there's some kind of objects there. So your work environment is very different than some of what we've seen in these talks, which is kind of disembodied and code and virtual and high tech. There's lots of resistors and cogs and motors and things around. So I wonder what, for you, having some of this stuff be physical and kinetic means, and to what extent having stuff break or fail or get to this kind of nexus between working and failing and being distorted the way that a distortion pedal is, how important that is in your kind of human-machine interactions.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Well, first of all, for me, there was a big question, which is like a super important question. Maybe we are machines as well. There is no proof that we are not machines. So that we are not made by someone who designed us. So we could be also machines by ourselves. And from this perspective, it changed completely the understanding of all these questions. And yeah, and also I'm from the country, I'm from the culture where people were always talking with machines. If it's a fridge that is broken or not functioning as it should, or a TV or something else, there was a tradition to hit it to make it working, or to talk to it, or I don't know, to be angry on some device because it doesn't like do what it should do. And we always talk with the machines. You know, maybe it's everywhere in the world like that, but in Russia, it's very special culture. Like my granny was always talking with the TV, for example. And I was observing this since my childhood, and I was so impressed by this. So I also become part of this culture.
Did it help?
Yes, usually it helps. It helps quite a lot, because like when you have glitches, they stop, or you at least can control, or you know, have some interaction with it. And yeah, you can move your antenna just slightly, and then it starts to show your like evening show much better. And of course, like your sound waves also interacting and interfering everything that is happening in the machine. And yeah, of course, there is no like physical explanation behind that. It's more like being very like I don't know how to say it proper. Well, from perspective of physics, of course, it's completely wrong and doesn't mean anything. But I took it as a kind of a credo for everything what I do. So, and I always use it with, you know, when I'm building a new machine, I'm always talking to it. And for me, all the machines are alive. All the machines I made by myself, they are alive. They are part of me. They are my extensions, as Robin said just recently. So I completely agree with everything what he said. So it's a very equal relationship between me and all my creatures, and they are just me actually. So my extensions. And from this perspective, of course, I perceive them all as a like of course I'm agree with that. Machines can create art, but not because they are independent, not because they have their own will, but just because I created them like that. But I cannot agree that they are just tools that are helping to provide you know, my ideas through them as interfaces, but they are like creatures that made by me, and they are like together with me providing some, you know, ideas and concepts. Yeah, I think that this is my main role.
Wait, I have to pause. We have a good representation of different countries. We had the conversations about understanding kind of spiritual embodiment in machines while we were in Japan doing another AI lab with Mutech Japan. But so we have a good representation locally of the people in the audience, but the panel we cover are the Americas, US, and Mexico, Italy, Russia, France, and Germany. So how many of us on the panel talk to our machines in order to get them to work? I'm curious. Not to argue with maybe superior Russian ability to talk to machines and get them to actually respond, but, and well, that's the next question. How many of your machines then responded positively to your suggestions? And in the audience, how many of you talk to your machines? It is lower, actually. Okay, so it seems to me it's not a good sample size, but, and of those of you who are talking to your machines, how many of them listen to you, at least some of the time? Not all of the time, but at least some of the time. Oh, okay, much lower. All right. Well, so whatever the Russians are saying seems to be, at least in this very skewed sample size, more effective. Yeah,
so
go for it.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird because I was here in the physical world. You jumped to the virtual world, so.
I was splitting it up, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Just to, you know.
But yeah, just to give this very interesting thing about language, I think is very important about anthropomorphizing. It's very easy to say like, okay, the AI is doing this because it's itself, but this is just language. When you actually work with AI on the level of coding it and having this feedback, it's like the same as improvising with an instrument. You know, you have a feedback, you press the piano or you play the guitar or whatever, and you get this response, and then you act on this response, and then you have this, as Chris Salter was saying yesterday, this dance between the human and the techne, right, and the technology. So I mean, I think it's a bit dangerous to talk about AI as a anthropomorphizing it, because then it shifts accountability to the technology, right, and not to the creators of the technology. And as we have seen with these like discourses of, transhumanism and everybody's going to get a chip implanted in their brain and blah, blah, blah. I think these are very dangerous narratives because it basically implies control. And who is making this control? I mean, you can call it at worst techno-fascism, at best surveillance capitalism ideas. Because also there is this imbued question in the technology itself, which is where does this technology come from? Who makes this technology? What are the biases and the cultural biases, as you were talking before, that make this machine, that shape this future? So that is something that we need to really talk about, because I think to fall into these ideas of like, there's only one future, we're gonna end up in the singularity, is a totally monocultural way of thinking things, and kind of leaves a lot of people out of the conversation, as we have seen in history, So instead of perpetuating a real futurism, you're only perpetuating a past colonial, oppressive, white, Western ideas, right? So I think these are the questions that we need to address when we talk about the future, when we talk about machines. Not about the agency of the machines. Like I work with AI, I work with EEG before in pieces, like hands-on. And they're very interesting pieces, but the actual thing you see in a piece of artwork is a human. It's like this idea and the culture and the history, and what is it saying to you? How is it speaking to you? Not the technology. The technology is always like, it passes, it's a trend, like right now we're talking about deep learning models. Maybe in 5 years we're going to be talking about, I don't know, some other kind of technology. So I think it's kind of a fleeting question to focus so much on this idea of some mystifying AI or mystifying technology. I think it's more important to address who is making this technology, what are the cultures that are being embedded, what are the biases that are being embedded into this culture, and can machines make art? I think it's more a question like who is making the art behind the machine.
Right. Well, I wondered even in this sort of human-machine hybrid, if it wasn't true that we hadn't kind of already gotten to this brain-machine interface, but that a lot of it seems to, especially in 2020, that interface has been, Facebook, right? and Facebook algorithms. And this is kind of melding with our minds and modifying our behavior.
Exactly.
But I'm not sure what, I mean, artists are obviously in the position of wanting to criticize that. I don't know where we do go next with that. I mean, sort of specifically to how do you kind of given that is this kind of Silicon Valley, colonialism, maybe even with California or California tech companies being the empire as much as the country behind them. How do you break up that hegemony?
I think like a good strategy is to actually listen to people who have been historically disenfranchised and actually take not their ideas of the future as a tokenism of just like inclusiveness and this idea of diversity, of like, okay, we have a diverse community, right? It's not about just like including people, it's actually building together these futures, and not just like, okay, by having a body that's differently colored than the majority, it's already okay, right? I don't think that's kind of like the idea, but I think it goes beyond, of course, like thinking beyond Silicon Valley, thinking about other countries that are actually promoting technologies, and I really like to cite this idea from Yu Hui, philosopher, that's talking about techno-diversity, and this idea of like post-humanism. It's like basically, as we said, a hegemonical idea that tries to totalize the future into only one thing. And, it's not about like, okay, a war between different technologies and different cultures. It's about having the idea that different technologies and different cultures are having different benefits for their specific uses, and these are informed by historical and cultural.
I want to come back to Riccardo because I know that you've got something to say. But speaking of kind of creating environments for these kind of conversations and diversifying some of the sort of personnel to talk about them, want to ask Natalia Fuchs, who's also the kind of gathered us here today and brought us together. Now that you've facilitated these laboratories in Japan, Russia, Canada, and virtually sort of here in Italy, how can you speak to that experience? And you know, we've been in these situations that bring together a lot of different people, maybe people who are new to AI, and speak to some of the things that Moises brought up about diversifying, and also get practical and hands-on. Do you have any kind of new understanding of how those environments can work to accomplish some of this, having been through this process in a few places, or can you talk about, sort of what you've taken away as a curator and facilitator from making these programs happen?
Hello. Yeah. So I, as a curator, I think I'm very, I'm in some kind of a special position because I can observe and see so many approaches of different artists that work with artificial intelligence. Making these laboratories in the last year and a half, and being advisor for many projects that were organized around AI art as a genre. One important thing I've noticed is that in that field in particular, of course, people are seeking for a very symbiotic relationship with the technology, I would say. So people try to approach AI from a very deep, mindful position, but at the same time, we become very tired and isolated of that communication very quickly. And it comes from a body-to-machine interaction, when I think there is a huge gap of understanding us, ourselves as a humans, and what kind of expectations we have at the moment towards artificial intelligence, because having all those different approaches, it's very different to come to one single position, and that becomes in a way a very radical experimentation. Because at the same time we try to build something about what we don't have such a straight idea, but at the same time we are, as a humans, are moved by very deep human wish and desire of having this symbiotic relationship to like someone, to the other human or technology at the end. And I think this is for me a very huge concern at the moment, the question of this balanced position towards AI, not in relation to the mind, but to in relation to the body also. And I think that the experience of the recent past 2 years with AI art become the most like radical laboratory experience for me also, because it helped to shape a critical perspective on art and technology, at least for me as for curator, and the other genres in media art didn't give me that chance. So this work in very different continents and different countries was this particular a very useful tool, I'd say, and I would suggest this to everyone who wants to have this critical approach and critical relation to the technology. So to go very deep to the understanding of the technology from different countries and different communities. And I think that technology producers and corporations at the moment, they don't do that at all, of course. And this social responsibility of understanding AI, what it can give to people, is coming from artistic communities in particular.
In the end, even for all of those disagreements, it did seem to me that there was some overlap, right? Or maybe not a consensus about everything, but that there was some common values. And you've been able to, or we've been able to kind of put that into some kind of document form, right?
Yeah, there is the Ai Art Manifesto that we were working on during 3 days of the residency here at Transart. It was a digital online residency with a team of artists, and we'll publish this document today. So hopefully it will be the voice of a specific community, or in some ways a generation of artists and curators that are related to this genre at the moment.
Yeah. So I'm looking to try to nail this to a door or something like Martin Luther later today. But there was, you know, you go to these labs, right, and there people fight and argue and don't always kind of see eye to eye, and we're all human, you know. We do have kind of like meltdowns and frustrations when you do these intensive labs. But it struck me that that there was, it sounds like there really was some kind of common voice, or there was some, that artists were, while we don't always agree, there was some, that there was some kind of common, I mean, did you get that sense, Moises, that there's some kind of overlap, like we're kind of coming from the same place?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think it's, this is what I talk about, like these disagreements are actually the rich thing about it. Like, it's not this idea of totalizing one idea of like, okay, this is the future of art. Even if it's a consensus, it's like actually seeing that there's these disagreements and kind of like, okay, that's actually, it's going to make us richer, because then you can take it from many different ways and you can switch between perspectives as well. So I think that's kind of like the beautiful thing about having these kind of publications and disagreements and stuff.
Yeah. You had a...
Speaking of disagreement, if there's something that I think we should disagree, is the notion that we are machines. I think there's plenty of evidence that, of course, our bodies are machines. But in order to claim that we are machine, we have to accept that we are just our bodies. And that's something that is far from being evident, from being clear to us. And another point that should make us a little bit suspicious about the notion that we are just bodies and therefore machines is that on the one hand, if we believe that we are machines, we're going to become like machines. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And who may get advantage of such a prophecy? Powers. Because then it's much easier to control bodies than control bodies that believe to be machines than to control people. People that have experiences, will, desires, that have an experience of the world. As far as I know, we have no evidence that any machine has ever had any feelings. And I tell you a secret, by background I'm an engineer. I got my PhD in AI, not in philosophy. But I never met a feeling or a thought in a code, in a piece of code. And so far there's no, even I'm working in the field of artificial consciousness, but the metaphor of the machine is an old metaphor. It's a metaphor that started in the 16th century. And here we are at Futurological Congress. I think we should look ahead and look for something even more advanced than reducing us to the mechanistic view of the 17th century. So I totally disagree with the idea that we are machines.
I'm not, Dima, I don't know if you want to respond to that. But I mean, you disagree that we're being machines partly in that that you're expanding the definition of being human rather than kind of confine it to this external model.
I'm not advocating any kind of dualistic view, idealistic view, or any soul level of our existence.
Yeah.
I'm a purely physicalist, but I think that the mechanistic view that reduces everything to the functioning of a machine-like body is not enough to explain what we are. We are a larger portion of the physical reality, and we need to understand that the body is just one gear in such a larger network.
Well, I'm curious if there's a way that we can become better connected to understanding from psychiatry, psychology, neuroscience. Because I was thinking about your book, but also thinking about Dan Siegel's book, which comes from a psychiatric perspective and says the same thing. Is there a way to kind of better imbue this sort of technological perspective that's dominated by these sort of large corporations with more of that actual physical understanding? What happened that message got lost? If that's sort of the understanding of the people who study the mind.
Well, I think there was a closed loop between having a mechanistic view of humans and having an anthropomorphic view of machines. And such a loop gets narrower and narrower, and we need to step outside of such a loop. So just to make an example, if I take a phone and I speak with the phone, because I'm speaking with someone at the other end of the phone, I don't think I'm speaking with the phone. Because the phone is a proxy, is a physical proxy of a larger set of events. So my suggestion is that the body may play exactly the same role that a phone plays, is a proxy of a larger world. And so we need to revisit both psychiatry, psychology, and in a way also AI, and to provide with a completely new ontology that it is up to date.
Speaking of acknowledging the larger world, just to open up to everybody as my kind of last question, for the message from Silicon Valley, the place that we keep describing in this way, but you know, was a point that I thought, and it was the end of the panel yesterday evening. And I think it wasn't this humanity in the age of artificial intelligence, and we kind of didn't get an answer to it. And that's so great. I think it was Grace Young, right? This engineer at the Alphabet Moonshot Factory, so the most optimistic kind of expression of Silicon Valley, said in her sort of closing comment, you know, the most important thing to her was that she feels like she right now in California can't go to the grocery store, and that she wanted the luxury of being able to breathe again. Because, of course, the air quality there is so poor that breathing is kind of lost. So I wonder if, I mean, is somewhere in this kind of AI, science, mind, and the sort of understanding of humanity, is there some relevance to some of the conversations that we're having to this kind of crisis that's unfolding, particularly, ironically enough, in the heart of Silicon Valley? I mean, that was kind of the reaction to her saying that yesterday.
Please stay here.
Hello?
I think, yeah, go for it, Robin. We can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I got interrupted. Yeah, I think these questions are really at the heart of the matter. I mean, I want to thank Moises for bringing up the idea, well, the questions about bias in AI, and we've been talking a lot about AI, but what is AI? We're talking about it as a technology, but it isn't really precisely locking down some specific technology. I think it's really a term that can pull in a lot of different ideas, biases, and ideologies. And I was really happy about the mentioning of gardening when in respect to working with technology for art as a metaphor. I think it's a very fitting metaphor, at least for the way I work with, or how I create art. I always think about it as creating some kind of environment or an ecology of objects, beings, algorithms, different things that interact and with which I interact. And I think when we look at AI and at the way it is used, the term is used today, it really has this ideology where, if we think of it as gardening, we're heading towards some kind of monoculture, really. You know, it's something that's being concentrated in large companies. And just to give you an example, I wanted to use some deep learning algorithms the other day, and I figured out that I'd have to use something like 35 GPUs networked together. So even if stuff is available on GitHub and you can start tinkering around with it and so on, there's really an environment right now and an ideology behind it that makes it hard to make it available and useful in a more social way, I think. And to get back to this gardening idea, I think maybe we should look at this way of technology, this kind of technology, really as an environment and as our minds being part of this environment, and maybe instead of creating huge monoculture fields, trying to make gardens that are more diverse and that can allow for different influences to flourish.
So I'm just looking at this timer. Anybody else with any closing thoughts on the future of humanity and how we define all consciousness, mind, and creativity? 2 minutes, 33 seconds.
Well, it's less than 30 seconds, actually. I think, yes, technology can save the world if this is going to be a product. Otherwise, companies who own technology aren't interested in saving the world.
Well, although if they're living in the middle of a an inferno. Maybe they may change their mind. Any other thoughts from the real or virtual world?
Well, very quickly, less than 30 seconds. As I said yesterday, if we shift our perspective from being a body to being a world, to save the world means to save ourselves. So I think that the big difference between natural being and AI machines so far has been the natural being are the outcome of the environment, while machines usually have been injected in the environment. So we would need to look in the future to build machines that will be the outcome of the environment, as we've been. And that may lead, it might pave the way to have really artificial conscious machines.
Natalia, you've dealt with, you're never one to shy away from a crisis. Any other thoughts on where this can go next, especially after this chapter?
Well, I think it's a pretty open process and the perspective, and what I see from all the discussions that were happening here in the Congress is that the more we unite as artistic and technological or artistic and scientific community, the more good result we're gonna have, because the perspectives they are so different, and we have to search for some mutual visions on that.
Yeah, any other? Dima, you're not treating yourself as a machine, hopefully also as a human. Moises? No, Dima?
Yeah, I would like to say that there was also a very big moment for me, like a very important point, that artificial intelligence and art is a very trendy topic right now. And there might be that it's a bit too much of attention to this topic right now, and we're going to see, you know, how it's going to change in a couple of years, and then after like 10 or I don't know, maybe 15 years, there will be a next generation of technologies, next generation of machines, and there will be again all these questions. And for me, it's, as an artist, it's very interesting to observe how it happens with many very interesting topics. Like just 5 years ago, we were all talking about the blockchain, and like 10 years before that, or like 7 years before now, we were talking about virtual reality, etc. So, and for me, it's just very interesting. I'm not really working with artificial intelligence in general, like as a technology with neural networks, really a lot. I'm just like looking at these technologies and trying to understand how they could be interesting and helpful. But as a main topic, as a just like a global topic, of course, it's a very interesting problem and very interesting situation. But I'm really waiting for a moment when we will make a next step in this, and let's see how it's going to be in 5 years, or I don't know, 7 years.
Well, I mean, you may not be doing AI, but I know that we can rely on you for human-machine interface anytime we need somebody who can translate and talk to our refrigerator. So that's important too. Just to finish on some kind of note, I mean, you know, for all my lofty language, I like stuff that makes cool sounds. That's kind of my day job. You were making some amazing sounds, I thought, and Isabella's visuals looked fantastic last night. So
yeah, just as a closing statement as well. I mean, like Dmitry said, it's not about the AI or the trendy technology at the moment. It's about who's making this art and what is it saying about the history of this, or in any kind of art, right? So it's not about even the technologies themselves. It's about the humans at the end, and yeah, and also like we really have to be critical about not take for granted these narratives that are coming from corporations or big congresses. You know, always take them with a grain of salt and kind of grab from different perspectives, but especially focus on the historically disenfranchised and really listen what people are saying. I think that's kind of like a good futurism to follow,
yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah. So more listening. In this case, we all kind of converged on our ideas rather than diverging this morning. But thanks so much. I appreciate it. And to all of you here in the room, since we don't have time for questions, I hope that you'll come chase after us at a safe distance with masks on, but still chase after us and talk to us in the room after all this. Thank you all so much.
Ciao.
Thank you.